I was the last person she taught. I didn't know that when she taught me. She spread the dough across the table the way she had done it 10,000 times before, not rolling it, pressing it, her palms flat, her wrists turning outward in a motion I have never seen anyone else use. She said nothing while she worked. She assumed I was memorizing. I was watching, which is not the same thing. 3 weeks later, she was gone. And the rugelach I have made every year since then is close, but not right. And I know it is not right. And I will spend the rest of my life knowing it. That woman was someone's grandmother. She might have been yours. The desserts that lived inside the Jewish delicatessens of 1940s and 50s New York were not the desserts you know from bakery cases and holiday tables. They were older, denser, less sweet, more specific, built for a clientele that had grown up eating sugar as a luxury and fat as a necessity, and that recognized in a properly made Mandelbrot or a honey cake or a rice pudding, built from day-old Challah, something that had no name in English but that meant, you are safe here, you are known here, someone made this for you. 15 of those desserts are gone. We are going to recover them, with enough detail that you can make them this week in your kitchen, from ingredients you can find. And somewhere in this list is the dessert your grandmother made that you have been trying to find for 30 years without knowing where to look. This channel exists because the things worth saving are almost never saved by institutions. They are saved by individuals who refuse to let go. If you are one of those individuals, subscribe now. What you remember may be the last copy of something irreplaceable. In 1945, the average Jewish delicatessen in New York City that operated a full kitchen produced between 4 and 8 dessert items daily, made from scratch, on the premises, by bakers who had learned their craft in the same chain of hand-to-hand transmission that governed every other technique in the immigrant kitchen. These were not pastry chefs in the culinary school sense. They were bakers in the older sense. People who had made the same things so many times that the knowledge had moved from the mind into the hands, and who adjusted for humidity and oven temperament and the age of the flour without consulting anything except what the dough felt like. The WPA surveys of New York Jewish food culture in the late 1930s document dessert cases at Lower East Side delis that contained items unavailable anywhere else in the city. Preparations so specific to the tradition that they had no equivalent in American baking and no market outside the community that had brought them from Eastern Europe and rebuilt them in tenement kitchens with American ingredients. What happened to those desserts is the same story as what happened to everything else on this channel. Assimilation pressure, the dispersal of the community that sustained them, the retirement of the bakers who made them, and the arrival of a commercial food industry that offered approximations cheap enough and convenient enough that most people stopped noticing the difference. Most people, not everyone. The people who noticed the difference are the reason this video exists. Ted Merwin, who has documented the American Jewish deli more thoroughly than anyone else writing today, describes the deli dessert case as the last point of contact many second-generation American Jews had with the food culture their parents had brought from Europe, the place where assimilation paused for 15 minutes over a piece of honey cake and a glass of tea. When the dessert case emptied, the pause ended. It has not resumed. Stay with us through item 12. What you learn there about why these desserts disappeared will change the way you read every recipe that comes after it. We are going to get there. Do not leave before we do. Original deli rugelach, not the crescent-shaped, jam-filled pastry now sold in every grocery store in America. The rugelach of the 1940s deli case was a different object, made from a cream cheese dough rolled paper-thin, spread with rendered chicken fat rather than butter, filled with a mixture of finely chopped walnuts, cinnamon sugar, and a very small amount of raisin that provided sweetness without dominating, rolled into a tight cylinder rather than a crescent, cut into 1-inch rounds, and baked until the layers separated and the exterior crisped, while the interior remained soft. At Russ and Daughters on Hester Street in the 1940s, rugelach sold for 2 cents each. The dough required cream cheese at a specific temperature, cold enough to hold its structure during rolling but not so cold that it cracked. and the rolling required the palm press technique that cannot be described adequately in words and must be watched to be understood. The chicken fat filling rather than butter was not a compromise. It was a kashrut decision that also produced a different flavor, less rich in the dairy sense, more savory, the fat carrying the ghost of the schmaltz rendering that had produced it. The grocery store rugelach that replaced this preparation in the 1970s and 80s used butter, used more sugar, used more jam, and became a sweeter, softer, more immediately pleasing object that bore the same name while being an entirely different dessert. The customers who had grown up on the original found the new version cloying. Their grandchildren found it normal. The grandchildren won, numerically, and the original disappeared into the category of things that only the elderly could describe, and that the elderly could not find anywhere to eat. Mandelbrot with double egg yolk, the twice-baked cookie, the Jewish biscotti, as it is sometimes called, though the comparison understates the original, in its 1940s Deli form, bore little resemblance to the pale, dry version now sold in Jewish gift shops and Hanukkah catalogues. The original Mandelbrot used only egg yolks, doubled from standard recipes, which produced a dough of extraordinary richness and a finished cookie with a deep amber color and a crumb that was dense and slightly yielding rather than the tooth-breaking dryness of the commercial version. The first bake set the log. The second bake, with the log sliced into half-inch rounds, crisped the cut surfaces while leaving the interior still carrying the tenderness of the double yolk. At Gertel's bakery on Hester Street, closed in 2007 after 80 years of continuous operation, Mandelbrot cost 3 cents each through the 1950s and was made 3 times a week because it kept well and the regulars expected it to be fresh. The double yolk technique was not a recipe instruction at Gertel's. It was an assumption, the way the thing was made, not a variation to be noted. When the baker who carried that assumption retired and the production was handed to someone trained on a standardized recipe, the assumption left with the baker and the Mandelbrot became something else. It kept the name. It lost the yolks. Nobody announced the change. Challah rice pudding, day-old challah, the braided egg bread of the Sabbath table, dense and slightly sweet, made with enough egg that it dried rather than staled, torn into rough pieces and soaked in a custard of whole milk, eggs, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon until the bread had absorbed the custard completely and the two had become a single thing, then baked in a low oven until the top had set and browned and the interior was soft enough to quiver when the pan was moved. At Ratner's on Delancey Street, Challah rice pudding appeared on the menu on Sundays, made from the challah that had not sold on Friday, priced at 7 cents a portion, served warm with a small pitcher of cold cream. The texture was unlike any other pudding. The challah's egg content meant the custard had 2 sources of richness working together, and the result was something between a bread pudding and a soufflé that collapsed gently when the spoon entered it. The dish required day-old challah specifically, because fresh challah was too moist to absorb the custard without becoming sodden. It required, therefore, a kitchen that baked challah on Friday and had leftover challah on Sunday, which meant it required a deli with a full bakery operation. When the delis of the 1960s and 70s began purchasing challah from outside bakeries rather than baking their own, a cost control measure that made complete economic sense, the supply of day-old challah that had always been available as a byproduct of Friday baking disappeared. The pudding that had depended on that supply disappeared with it. It was not a recipe that was lost. It was a supply chain. What connects rugelach, Mandelbrot, and a challah pudding is a fact that the commercial baking industry of the post-war era never had to confront honestly. The desserts that came from this tradition were built on byproducts and necessities, and their quality was inseparable from those origins. The rugelach was made with chicken fat because butter was not available on a meat menu. The Mandelbrot used double yolks because yolks were richer than whole eggs, and the baker had learned that richness was what the dough needed. The pudding used day-old challah because fresh challah was for selling. The constraints that had produced these desserts were not limitations to be overcome. They were the source of the dessert's character. When the commercial food industry removed the constraints, replacing chicken fat with butter, standardizing the egg ratio, eliminating the dependency on house-baked bread, it believed it was improving the products. It was destroying them. What you are about to hear at item 9 will reframe every dessert you have tasted that called itself Jewish and was not. The gap between the name and the thing is larger than you know. Honey cake, lekach, for Rosh Hashanah. Not the dense, dark, one-note honey cake sold in cellophane at Judaica stores every September. The lekach of the 1940s and 50s Deli bakery was a spiced honey cake of specific complexity, made with strong brewed coffee as the liquid component, rather than water or juice, which contributed bitterness that balanced the sweetness of the honey. With a combination of ground ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper that produced a warmth building from the back of the throat, rather than arriving immediately at the front, and with schmaltz rather than oil, which gave the crumb a specific tenderness that vegetable oil cannot replicate. At Moishe's bakery on 2nd Avenue, lekach was available year-round, but sold primarily in the 10 days before Rosh Hashanah, when the tradition of eating sweet foods for the new year made honey cake a communal obligation rather than a personal choice. The price in 1952 was 40 cents for a full loaf. The recipe that produced it had been in the baker's family since before the First World War and had been adjusted for American ingredients in ways that took years to calibrate. American honey is different from European honey. American flour absorbs liquid differently. The American oven runs hot in ways that the wood-fired ovens of the shtetl did not. Those adjustments lived in the baker's hands and in his calendar, in the knowledge of how long the batter needed to rest before baking, how dark the crust should be before the loaf was done, how the cake felt when pressed at the center, and the center was ready. When Moishe's closed in 1974, the adjusted recipe closed with it. What is sold as lekach today is a reconstruction from printed sources that did not capture the adjustments, and it is sweet and dense and entirely without the complexity that made the original something people planned their year around. Hamantaschen with prune lekvar. The three-cornered Purim cookie exists in every Jewish bakery in America. Filled with poppy seed or fruit preserves or chocolate chips in the modern version, the Hamantaschen of the 1940s deli case used a specific filling that has almost entirely disappeared. Prune lekvar, a dense, barely sweet paste of cooked prunes with a small amount of lemon zest and black pepper, spread thin and folded into the dough without additional sugar, relying on the prune's own complex sweetness and the pepper's warmth to carry the filling against the slight richness of the egg and schmaltz dough. At Gertel's on Hester Street, Hamantaschen with lekvar cost 2 cents each and were available only in the week before Purim, which meant that the demand concentrated into 7 days, and the baker worked those 7 days at a pace that produced something close to a trance state. The lekvar required cooking prunes down from their raw state over low heat for 40 minutes until they had lost most of their moisture and concentrated into a paste, a preparation that required attention and time and produced no commercial efficiency. The poppy seed filling and the fruit preserve fillings that replaced lekvar in the commercial bakery required no cooking and no attention. They came ready to use from a supplier. They were also less interesting in every way that mattered to someone who had eaten the original, but less interesting is not a category that the commercial food industry measures, and the category it does measure, cost per unit, favored the substitute absolutely. Teiglach, the Rosh Hashanah confection that most American Jews under 50 have never encountered, and that most American Jews over 70 remember with an intensity disproportionate to its size. Small pellets of egg dough, boiled in honey with ginger until the honey had reduced to a thick amber glaze that coated each pellet and bound them into a rough cluster that hardened as it cooled into something between a candy and a pastry, eaten by breaking pieces from the cluster and understanding that the honey on the exterior was not sweetness in the modern sense, but something older and more complex. the honey of a beehive in a field rather than the processed honey of a commercial jar. At several Bronx delis in the 1940s and early 50s, Teiglach appeared in the week before Rosh Hashanah in waxed paper packages tied with string, made by the baker's wife in a separate operation from the main baking, priced at 15 cents for a cluster sufficient for a family. The preparation required monitoring the honey as it reduced, understanding when it had reached the right temperature by how it fell from a spoon rather than by thermometer, and this monitoring could not be delegated to someone who had not done it enough times to read the honey correctly. When the baker's wife, who had always made the Teiglach, died in 1958, the Bronx deli that had sold her clusters for 15 years did not find a replacement. The baker attempted the preparation himself twice, produced something he considered unsatisfactory, and removed Teiglach from the holiday menu. He did not know that his customers would have accepted unsatisfactory. They would have accepted anything, because the alternative was nothing, and nothing is what they got. Stop here. If your grandmother made Teiglach or lekach or any dessert that appears on a holiday table in your memory and nowhere else in your life, leave its name in the comments right now. One word, the name of the dessert, and the holiday it belonged to. This comment section is assembling the last inventory of what existed, and your comment is an item in that inventory. Leave it before the video moves you past the moment. Noodle kugel, the savory version. Not the sweet kugel of the modern Shabbat table, loaded with cream cheese and pineapple and cornflake topping. The kugel of the 1940s deli kitchen was a savory preparation. Wide egg noodles cooked and drained, mixed with beaten eggs, schmaltz, caramelized onion, salt, and white pepper, poured into a greased baking dish, and baked until the top had set into a crust, and the interior remained custardy and soft. At Bernstein's on Essex Street in the early 1950s, a square of noodle kugel cost 8 cents and came warm, cut from a pan that had been in the oven since morning. The flavor was simple and complete, the sweetness of the caramelized onion working through the richness of the egg and schmaltz, the noodle providing the neutral backdrop that allowed both to be present without competition. This was not a dessert in any formal sense. It appeared in the dessert case because it was sweet adjacent, because the line between savory and sweet in the immigrant Jewish kitchen was a line drawn by context rather than ingredient, and kugel crossed it freely depending on what was needed at the table. The sweet kugel that replaced it in the post-war years was a second-generation choice, an Americanization that added sugar and cream cheese and fruit to make the dish legible to a palate trained on American desserts. The Americanization succeeded. The original disappeared. This is the pattern this video has been documenting since the first item, and it does not become less sad with repetition. Apple cake, Tzimmes cake, built from the apple and dried fruit preparation that was already on the stove. Not a cake with apple in it, a cake built around the conversion of a savory preparation into a sweet one. The apples and prunes and carrots that had been cooking together for a long braised Tzimmes, pulled from the pot when they were soft and fragrant and slightly caramelized, folded into a simple egg and flour batter with cinnamon and a small amount of honey, and baked until the fruit's moisture had steamed through the batter and the whole thing had set into something dense and moist, and carrying the concentrated flavor of fruit that had been cooked twice.
Welcome
It appeared at several Lower East Side delis in the 1940s as a Monday special, made from the Tzimmes left over from the Sabbath pot, transformed into a dessert by the addition of batter and an oven. It required the Sabbath preparation to have happened first, which means it required a kitchen that operated on the Jewish weekly calendar, which means it required an owner and a baker who understood their kitchen as an expression of that calendar. When the delis of the 1960s and 70s decoupled their menus from the Jewish weekly and holiday cycle, in order to serve a more general clientele, to remain open on Friday evenings, to stop making dishes that had no market outside the community that had shrunk away, the Tzimmes cake lost the preparation that produced it. It was not removed from the menu. It simply could no longer exist. Sponge cake, lekach style. The baker's sponge, made without any fat at all, relying entirely on the air beaten into eggs for its rise and its tenderness, flavored with lemon zest and a small amount of orange juice, baked in an ungreased tube pan and cooled upside down so the structure set before the cake was unmolded. At every deli with a serious baker in the 1940s, sponge cake was made weekly and sold by the slice for 5 cents. The technique required beating whole eggs and sugar together over warm water. Not a double boiler in the modern sense, just a bowl set over a pot of barely simmering water, until the mixture had tripled in volume and left a ribbon when the beater was lifted. Then folding in flour with a patience and a lightness of hand that could not be rushed without collapsing the structure that had taken 20 minutes of beating to build. The bakers who did this had arms accustomed to the work. The 20 minutes of constant motion that the recipe required had become, after years of repetition, no more effortful than breathing. When those bakers retired and were replaced by bakers trained on recipes that used baking powder and shortening to approximate the sponge's lightness without the labor, the approximation was close enough that most customers did not notice, and the ones who noticed said nothing because they had learned that saying something changed nothing. The new sponge was fine. The old sponge was extraordinary. Fine one. What you are about to hear is the ghost dish of this entire list. The one that was never written down anywhere, that exists only in the memory of people who tasted it, and that will be completely unrecoverable within 20 years, unless something changes right now. Honey and walnut roll, the dessert with no canonical name, described differently by every elderly person who remembers it, made at different delis under different names or under no name at all, appearing on some menus as walnut strudel and on others as honey roll, and on others as simply the roll, as if it required no further identification because everyone in the room already knew. The preparation, reconstructed from interviews conducted with former deli customers by a food historian in the late 1990s, involved a yeast-leavened dough rolled thin and spread with a mixture of honey, finely chopped walnuts, cinnamon, and a very small amount of black pepper, then rolled tightly into a log, allowed to rise a second time, and baked until the exterior had developed a dark, crackled crust, and the interior had become a soft spiral of dough, and filling in which the honey had caramelized against the walnut, and the walnut had softened against the honey, and the two had become inseparable. It appeared at a deli on East Tremont Avenue in the Bronx, whose name 3 of the 4 people interviewed could not remember with certainty. It appeared at a deli on Brighton Beach Avenue in Brooklyn that closed in 1969. It appeared, according to one woman interviewed in 2001, at a deli on Fordham Road, where her father had taken her every Sunday morning from 1947 until 1955, and where she had eaten one piece of the roll with a glass of milk, while her father read the paper and argued with the counterman about something she could never afterward remember. She remembered the roll. She could describe the crackled crust, the resistance at the first bite, the way the honey ran slightly when the spiral was exposed by the knife. She could not give the interviewer a name. She could not give the interviewer an address. She was 83 years old when the interview was conducted, and she said, near the end of it, that the thing she found strangest about getting old was not the forgetting itself, but the knowledge of what the forgetting would eventually take with it. That somewhere inside her was the last accurate memory of how that roll tasted, and that when she was gone, the memory would be gone too, and the roll would be gone in the only way that mattered, which was gone from anyone's ability to reconstruct it. She died in 2004. The roll is now a description without a recipe, a taste without a maker, a Sunday morning that exists only in the accounts of people who are themselves almost all gone. If you are over 65 and there is a dessert you remember from a deli or from your grandmother's kitchen that you have never seen written down anywhere, please go to the comments right now and describe it. Not the recipe, the experience, what it looked like, what it felt like in your hand, what it tasted like at the first bite, what you were doing when you ate it, and who was there. Every detail you leave is a detail that might allow someone to reconstruct what you remember. The comment section of this video is the most important archive this channel operates. Please use it. Rugelach is where we end because rugelach is where we began. With a woman spreading dough across a table with her palms, a motion I have never seen anyone else use. I have been trying to replicate that motion for years. I have the dough close, I have the filling close, I have the cream cheese at the right temperature, and the walnuts chopped to what I believe is the right size, and the schmaltz measured to what I believe is the right amount. What I do not have is the 10,000 repetitions that moved the technique from her mind into her hands, and I cannot acquire 10,000 repetitions retroactively, and so what I make is close but not right, and I know it is not right, and making it anyway, close but not right in a kitchen where I am present and trying and paying attention, is the only act of recovery available to me. Make one dessert from this list this week. Not perfectly, not authentically. Make it in your kitchen with what you can find, with the recipe you can reconstruct, with the technique you can approximate, and come back to the comments and tell us what happened. Not whether it was right. What you noticed while you were making it. Because what you notice, standing at a table pressing dough with your palms and understanding for the first time why the motion matters, is the knowledge beginning to return to a body that was always capable of holding it. The desserts on this list are not gone because the recipes are lost. They are gone because the making stopped. The making is the only thing that can bring them back.